That's looking good, Alexis. I'll let you
That
kick
working?
off.
Super,
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
I will try to get through it as quickly as I can. Okay, so I'm going to be showing you an example, I suppose, of a code in terms of how it was developed, and then the process we took, and then how it's been used in the first phases and other parts of the actual delivery of this project. So a bit of background. First of all, so the sort of location, I suppose, and the sort of master plan vision for the place. This is quite a large site, directly adjacent to Cambridge's airport, which is a private airport owned by the Marshall Group. And the Marshall Group commissioned us to take their site and to work through it to the point where we are now. It's part of a much larger sort of long-term expansion of the city, in this area really. There's a lot with work in terms of eventually moving the airport itself. This particular development has 1,350 homes, so it's not small. It's not the largest thing in the world, but it's not small. But it also includes new employment spaces, which are essentially a kind of re-provision of existing employment in sheds currently on parts of the site, and as well as a new local centre. And obviously we work very closely with the Southampton Cambridge planning team all the way through it. It started many, many years ago now, back in about 2012, with an inquiry by design process, which involved the whole community. And obviously there was an awful lot of concern and things like that, as well as a lot of aspiration at the time. And that eventually turned into an outline consent for the overall sort of footprint of the development, and gave some sort of form to it within that outline consent. It had, not really shown here, but lots of parameter plans and things obviously attached to that. Outline consent has already been said, are quite a blunt tool, and can be quite frightening, actually, I think, for those of us who sort of produce them or work with them. So alongside it, we worked with the Marshall family to set out to kind of try to capture their design principles. And what we did is we produced a design principles guide. This guide set out everything that the family cared about, and it was then used as part of the selection process to get a development partner. And it then later formed the basis of the design code. So in developing the design code, we were brought back onto the project. We had to compete again, as often have to do with these things. We were brought back onto the project, working with a developer we've done a lot of work with, particularly in Cambridge and in other areas, which is Hill. And so we started developing the design code, working with Marshall and Hill as a JV developer. And we had to sort of think about how we were going to start this process of a design code. The kind of ringing in our ears was a lot of things about how frightening design codes are, and what the dangers of them, as well as all the hope. And this graphic, which I can take no credit for, this came from Design Southeast, from another project we were working with them on, but I really like it. And it just sort of really sets out these word clouds, the hopes and aspirations of making design coding, which is around vision, around projects, and around what can be done, and the excitement. And then there's a sort of dead hand of bureaucracy and misapplied rules, essentially, and also the danger of then the market coming in and deliberately misunderstanding it sometimes. Maybe. So when we developed the design code, we did it with lots and lots of different sort of parts of Cambridge's sort of bodies. So first thing we worked with, or one of the things we worked with, was the Cambridge's Quality Review Panel. That's for those people who've worked with that. They're a really great group, actually, a great group of individuals. And we met with the QRP twice. Twice was really good because it just meant that we could really check things through. And what we agreed with them was that the code should ensure quality, but mustn't be a block to future innovation. And we sort of established a principle of site-wide coding. And then we set out a structure that showed how the site-wide code was the most important part, and then we might talk about how that might be applied in different specific places. We also work very closely with Trevine, who's going to be speaking after me, to develop the code. And I think there are a number of really critical elements to that that have already come up in other places. First of all, there was going to visit sites together right at the outset to just get a sense of kind of what works and what doesn't, what did we like. And then Later on, we did testing day. We did a testing day or a couple of testing days with Trevine, and other groups were brought out. I imagine he'll talk about those later as well. But they were incredibly helpful in terms of essentially taking our code and taking it apart and seeing what worked and challenging it. So the Wing design code, as it emerged, what we did is we tried to keep it relatively short, first thing. So we set ourselves, we were set a target of under 100 pages, and we just about managed to do that. We've got 93 pages. I'd have loved to have made it shorter, actually. But I think 93 pages is still pretty useful. It's an A4 format. We really wanted something that would fit on a bookshelf. We wanted something that the design teams could actually really use and print out, and it wouldn't get lost somewhere else. And so we wanted the whole thing to feel strategic all the way through, right down to even the contents page only fitting on one page, so it's all at a glance. That strategy went to strategic language as well. So we essentially said that there should only be either musts or shoulds, and we clarified exactly what they meant from the outset in terms of how we set out the language. Must was where compliance was mandatory, and should where it was recommended. That recommendation, by the way, meant that if you deviated from the should, you had to provide evidence as to why you had, and that evidence had to be on the basis of improving the delivery of the vision. It wasn't about saving money, essentially. Everything else was made clear to be illustrative only. The topics that we used were varied. I'm not going to go through all of them, obviously, but here's some example double-page spreads that we used within the document. So, for example, we felt there were a number of risk elements that we noticed in other master plans and other places have been built out. First of all, we thought junctions and intersections. Essentially, it's how highways relate and routes relate to building designs. And we just felt that those were the kind of things where things went really wrong. So we set out we tried to set out some very clear instructions about what we felt about those, about how buildings and movement should work together. And that was particularly important because this was done with working with highways as well, because all of the roads were designed to be adopted. So again, that was really important to get that buy-in from a whole wide range of collaborators. We did.
Alexis, sorry to interrupt. Just say you've got about a minute and a half left, if that's okay.
My apologies. Building design, we looked at a number of different aspects, but we really just tried to focus on active frontages and other sort of key qualities. Materials, we advocated a generally brick material palette. That was important from our client's point of view, but we tried to do that with a mixed palette. And the idea was to promote an idea of what we called cottage Cambridge, the sort of town, not gown Cambridge with mixed different materials of small artisan terraces. We did actually touch on building design as well, in the sense of we did sort of do's and don'ts. And we principally said about things we wouldn't accept within the code. And a lot of that was actually just about really poor integration of services and things like that. And we gave some ideas of how to use materials. Character areas we touched on with key sort of ideas about how those different principles could come together. And we just had 3 character areas to keep it quite simple. And we had an overall framework plan that pulled them together and a checklist. So the code in use, we've had planning progress. So this is the first, we've had phase 1A has been approved and is now on site. We've had the infrastructure approved and the new school as well, which I'll talk about for about 10 seconds. And then this is one of the streets that's come out of that process in terms of the key principles that were set up at the outset. We also then, as part of that planning process, we use at each stage in the pre-app process, we refer back to the design code and we show essentially how the designs that they're developing relate back to it. The flexibility that was built in has been really beneficial and allowed other things to happen. For example, in this case, the creation of courtyards, which weren't envisaged in the original scheme. We've used it as a strong tool for architectural coordination, where the whole market square, this is a local centre, has been developed with a number of different players, including different architects and different developers, bringing together the school and other community uses. We could develop that with the landscape architects as well, looking at how we integrate all the different uses into that, and the actual uses themselves, and just how how entrances and things like that work together to animate the spaces throughout the day. And then that comes together in this view. And then finally, in terms of the delivery, The material code's been really helpful. They've enabled us to work through a whole load of different material palettes, as we've found bricks were quite difficult to procure at this stage because of COVID and things. And the first buildings are starting to appear out of the ground. They're very much starting to do the kinds of things that we're envisaging about corners and things like that. And then finally, this is just one of the views of the new local parks that's just about to be started on site. And my apologies for running over.
Not at all. Wonderful stuff, Alexis, and nice to see the Wing Design Code coming into fruition and seeing buildings built of all the stuff we put down in diagrams years ago. So that's wonderful. Thank you very, very much.